you know, for those of you that have been here before, you know we've printed up these nice brochures. They've got the full bios, so we're going to have to practice all day long of not spending a lot of time on bios with your permission, because we've got it. We have it in here, and I think it suffices to say that Greg Walden, of course, is chairman of the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee. So he's the leader in the House on the issues, many of the issues that we're going to be discussing today. He, you know, truly is. I've been able to observe him for a number of years and watch the way he operates and runs his committee in a collegial, dignified, distinguished way. And so it's an honor and a pleasure to have Chairman Walden with us today. So welcome him with me, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. Randy, thank you very much for those kind words of introduction. And while I'm not going fishing after this, I'm probably going hunting, hope to bag some really bad regulations. I want to thank you, the Free State Foundation, for the invitation to come and keynote your conference and share some remarks about where I think communications is headed in America. As you know, I'll be addressing the Subcommittee's Communications Act update. And we're going to start with the reauthorization of the Commission itself, Federal Communications Commission. Recent months have made it clear to me that this is necessary for a variety of policy and procedural reasons. Of course, the biggest headline grabber this winter has been the FCC's adoption of new net neutrality rules that reclassify broadband as a telecommunications service. I think applying these outdated utility-style regulations to the Internet will ultimately result in increased uncertainty. You hear it already across the market, leading to depressed investment, decreased innovation, reduced consumer choice, and a slowdown of our exceptionally vibrant Internet economy. And all that will ultimately hurt consumers. Now that the full text of the rules has been released, we all have an opportunity to review exactly what the FCC decided to apply and the legal grounds for their decision to reclassify. I know there's a wide range of opinions out there on every aspect of the adopted rules, with disagreement from all angles about what is legal, what is not. I also know one inescapable fact, and that is this: these rules will be challenged in court, leading to uncertainty for consumers, for ISPs, for edge providers, and for investors. This chilling pall cast over the Internet is not what this vibrant ecosystem deserves. You know, by traveling a questionable legal path, the Commission has again thrust the Internet into a world of lawsuits, potentially untenable rules, regulatory overreach that will hurt consumers. Jerry Garcia might have said, "What a long, strange trip it's been." I've spoken at length recently about my concerns about this approach, as well as my strong belief that a legislative alternative that Chairman Upton and Chairman Thune and I have proposed is the best possible path forward. The bill that we have out there in draft form, it's been out for a long time now, prohibits blocking, throttling, paid prioritization, and requires that ISPs be transparent in the network management practices and prices. We cover both fixed and mobile broadband, and we provide enforcement mechanisms that allow the FCC to address complaints from consumers as well as raise investigations of its own accord. We've done a great deal of outreach to the ISPs, edge providers, public interest groups, and many, many others on ways to get information from them on how we can make this bill even better. And we will continue to do that. All along, we've been open-minded about the appropriate way to codify these rules, and we have made a genuine and sincere effort to reach a compromise that is palatable to both sides of the aisle. And I remain fully committed to a bipartisan legislative solution. Beyond the major legal flaws in the rules that have been put forward, perhaps the most troubling aspect of the Commission's net neutrality decision is the way in which it was made. Many questions have been raised about the agency's procedures, the Commission's independence, and the transparency of decision-making at the FCC. As a result of the administration's direct interference in the FCC process, the public was not given its legally guaranteed opportunity to articulate concerns with the Commission's proposed course of action. With only passing mention of a Title II approach in the Commission's May NPRM and tentative conclusions that contradict the Commission's ultimate action, this was not good process. It was bait and switch. This is the most recent, but not by a long shot, the only abuse or complete lack of legitimate process at the Federal Communications Commission. I've often said the bad process results in bad policy, a principle that is guiding the efforts of our subcommittee to conduct a thorough examination of the way that the Federal Communications Commission works through a return to the formal practice of congressional reauthorization. During the information gathering period of our Communications Act update, we sought comment from many stakeholders on a wide variety of issues. Unsurprisingly, one of the themes that threaded so many diverse commenters together was a need for a modern agency to implement modern laws. When those that are regulated and the public lack confidence in their regulator, there will inevitably be problems. This is why the subcommittee has chosen to begin our ComAct update with a reauthorization of the Federal Communications Commission. You know, it's been 25 years, quarter of a century, since Congress last passed legislation reauthorizing the agency, and it's nearly impossible to articulate the ways in which the technological world has changed during that quarter of a century. It's time to take a hard look at exactly how the FCC is spending the taxpayers' money. By the way, that is our responsibility as the authorizing committee, as well as how much they are spending. We began this process earlier this month with a hearing that evaluated the FCC's fiscal 2016 budget, where the FCC's managing director testified about the administration and management of the agency. We're doing our due diligence. The agency's budget request for 2016 exceeds $500 million. That's a great deal of money coming from the pockets of communications consumers in America. As the committee tasked with oversight of the Commission, it is our job to make sure that the money they want to spend is allocated and used in a way that is both efficient and transparent. Our first budget hearing was a deep dive into the Commission's appropriation request and explored a variety of spending and management issues. We talked to Managing Director John Wilkins about many of the discrepancies, but we were left with more questions than answers in many categories. While I don't attribute that outcome to a failing on the part of Mr. Wilkins, it is cause for additional hearings, and we will have them on the reauthorization of the FCC. One of the major areas of concern for me was the unusual request for $25 million transfer from the Universal Service Fund. They want to use this money, they say, to cover personnel costs for administration of the Commission's USF responsibilities. And while, of course, I support efforts to rid the USF of waste, fraud, and abuse, the FCC has been clear that these funds are not for audits. They are to cover salaries of FCC employees. The Commission's Inspector General already receives funds for audits, and the independent body designated to manage the USF, USAC, also receives more than $100 million a year for the administration and oversight of this fund. This appears to be a rather transparent attempt by the Federal Communications Commission to decrease the size of its budget request by transferring $25 million of its expenses directly onto the backs of American consumers. This is not how good government should work. Congress should have good sense to see through this charade. Now, the Universal Service Fund itself has long been a budgetary blank check at the Commission. And one solution that we have frequently urged the Commission to consider is a cap on the overall size of the fund and for each fund. American families across the country have tightened their belts to live within their means in recent years, and it's time for the Federal Communications Commission to do the same. Allowing the FCC to continually grow the pot of money from which they draw these subsidies does not promote cost-effective allocation of consumers' telecom dollars. Notable lack of restraint by the agency in this area has resulted in a 45% growth since 2008. Now that's a compound annual growth rate 3.5 times the rate of inflation during the same period. This rapid and unchecked expansion is unsustainable and for many of us unacceptable. Now, by capping the size of the fund through our reauthorization legislation and forcing the agency to operate within that cap, the Commission will be forced to truly evaluate the need for each piece, old and new, of the USF. Now, while we all support things like providing students with high-speed broadband and connecting rural communities like those in my district, it shouldn't be done without any spending restraints. The USF needs a budget, and it needs to be accountable again to Congress for the budget and how these consumer dollars are spent. Taking the time to make hard decisions, prioritize spending, it's not fun, but it is what the government owes to its citizens. Also, when the Commission does feel it is necessary and appropriate to expand the size of the fund beyond the budget cap, all proposals should be referred to the Federal-State Joint Board on Universal Service for evaluation. Unique and valuable perspective provided by the Joint Board can help to ensure that money is being used in a way that achieves the goals and policy objectives of the fund without overreaching or overspending, and within a budget that can be submitted to the FCC, or by the FCC for approval by Congress. Later this morning, our Subcommittee on Communications and Technology will continue its reauthorization work with an oversight hearing featuring all 5 commissioners. I anticipate the committee members will have many questions for the commissioners, given the events of the last few months, and I look forward to hearing the answers from the commissioners. It's becoming more and more evident to me that this is an agency that is overreaching its regulatory and spending authority. And one way to staunch the bleeding is to get back to the basics, being accountable to the authorizing and appropriating committees of the Congress. After all, the FCC is a child of Congress, and it is our job to make sure the FCC is within its authority and that it is spending taxpayer dollars, consumer dollars, wisely and within a budget. Now, let me clarify, this doesn't mean we have to agree with every policy initiative they undertake, but it does mean the agency cannot choose to ignore the explicit limits on its authority. Another problem is the FCC's current proposal to close 16 of the 24 field offices, leaving only 8 in operation, with only 33 staff in the field. As a result, there will be no field offices in the entire Pacific Northwest, including the states of Washington, Idaho, and my own state of Oregon. These offices are responsible for resolving interference issues that could cripple public safety communications and 911 operations, and prevent pirate radio stations from operating illegally and interfering with licensed broadcasters. This includes resolving interference issues that could adversely impact maritime communications, like barging and shipping. These are functions that the FCC performs that benefit the entire country and our coasts and help protect public safety communications, broadcasters, commerce, and the public from harmful interference. It's sort of job one for the FCC. I am particularly concerned with this proposal given the fact the FCC's stated goal is to resolve all interference complaints involving public safety within 1 day. Now, how will closing offices help accomplish that? Let's put this in some perspective. Under the FCC's new plan, the closest field agent to Alaska would be stationed in nearby San Francisco. Even if the FCC field staff was boarding a plane for Anchorage when the call came in to resolve the interference, it would take over 6 hours just to arrive in the state of Alaska. If the interference is in a smaller or more remote community, say Dutch Harbor, home of the U.S. commercial fishing fleet for the Bering Sea and a Coast Guard Marine Safety Detachment, it's possible that FCC field staff wouldn't arrive in town in 24 hours, let alone resolve interference to safety of live radio operations. How is that in the public interest? If there are other issues involving overstaffing and staff qualifications, those are management problems and are not resolved by closing field offices. Similarly, it is unclear to me whether the FCC is simply eliminating field engineers to create headroom for the continuing expansion of the number of lawyers in the Commission's Enforcement Bureau. In addition to one of the most troubling changes I've observed at the FCC in recent years is the escalation of partisanship among the commissioners. The level of division is pretty clearly demonstrated by the facts, and by the historic level of 3-2 partisan votes on major issues and the extent to which the chairman appears to be abusing process in order to disadvantage minority commissioners. In fact, Politico wrote in July of 2014 that there had already been more party line votes under Chairman Wheeler than under the previous 4 chairmen and acting chairman combined. In 8.5 years under both Democrats and Republicans, there were 10 total partisan votes. In the first 9 months under Chairman Wheeler's tenure, there were 11, a number that's increased since that time. From the sound of it, one of the driving forces behind this partisanship has been a breakdown in processes at the agency when it comes to consideration and negotiation of items. Minority commissioners, and I know you'll be hearing from them later today, have stated that they didn't receive items to be voted on in a timely manner so as to be able to fully consider complex legal and policy matters in those documents. In one such instance, a revised order was presented to the commissioners just before midnight on the eve of the opening meeting, containing thousands of edits. In other instances, items were circulated absent key information, and commissioners were allegedly told they would be briefed after they voted. You know what? This is simply unacceptable. It's an unacceptable way to run the agency, and process reform legislation should require the Commission to conduct an inquiry that would consider how to establish procedures to ensure that all commissioners and the public have adequate time to review any proposed decision document before the commissioners vote on it. This would include the specific language of any proposed rule or amendment. Can you imagine that, actually getting to see what you're voting on? All 5 commissioners and the public should have the opportunity to fully consider the complicated items that are so often before the Commission. So I plan to pursue reforms in future legislation that will tackle the lack of transparency in the agency's actions. Whether it is not releasing proposed text for public comment, or to all commissioners on a timely basis before voting, or the text of final rules until weeks after adoption, or the use of delegated authority to obscure what is actually happening within the Commission, there needs to be a better blueprint for public posting of text of any proposed or final orders so there's no question exactly what is happening on a particular item, and to ensure adequate public and commissioner input. Greater transparency leads to more informed debate and deliberation, and ultimately will result in better policy making. Allowing for review of final rules can help spot flaws that can be fixed prior to adoption, rather than waiting for a court order or subsequent proceeding. After all, as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. A related area of reform is highlighted in the net neutrality proceeding, and that is inclusion of actual text in notices of proposed rulemakings. My original 2011 process reform bill mandated the FCC not adopt any rules that had not been included as proposed rules in the NPRMs. Commenters must be able to make informed submissions to the record, and they cannot do so if there's a dramatic shift in what is set forth in the NPRM and what is eventually adopted by the agency. Now, in that same piece of legislation, the FCC would be required to publish any order, decision, or report within 7 days of adoption. The net neutrality proceeding drove home this need, and in fact makes me think the publication in advance of a vote is instead the standard we should adopt. The agency is considering permanently enacting rules. There shouldn't be any secret about what exactly those rules would look like. In many instances, the stakes are too high to rely on press reports, statements out of the agency, or rumors gleaned from insider information. There should be a standard for allowing the public to see what will be voted on before the Commission must do so. What I find to be most disturbing about these abuses of process is what seems to be intent to use procedural workarounds in order to achieve a very particular policy endgame. Independent agencies like the Federal Communications Commission were created to be analytical, fact and law-driven collaborative bodies that would allow them to address very complicated, nuanced issues without succumbing to partisan populism. This is why they're called independent agencies and are governed by boards or commissions, as opposed to a single leader like a cabinet department. Yet instead of trying to negotiate or come to a compromise based on a focused analysis of the facts and the law, these high-profile proceedings have become heavily politicized and seemingly decided on the basis of who can generate the most emails to the Commission. Again, this is not the way these types of decisions should be made. My efforts over the past 3 Congresses to reform the processes of the FCC have been largely driven by a desire for better government. We can do better than this. We can have greater transparency and accountability for those who are regulated and the consumers who are paying the bill, and a nimble and responsive agency to oversee this dynamic sector. I've repeatedly emphasized reform legislation was not a pot shot at any particular commissioner, chairman, or commissioner, and that I was seeking to remedy institutional failures and loopholes and leave the place better than we find it. In fact, initially I praised Chairman Wheeler's initiative to improve process, including the appointment of special counsel for process reform. Unfortunately, it seems my praise was a little premature. Evidence of procedural failings, questionable dealings, and partisan breakdowns within the agency continue to stack up. I have grave concern about the way the FCC is being run. I plan to address these issues in our hearing today and in the future, and hope that we can find ways to return to a more functional method of formulating the policy decisions coming out of the Commission that are vitally important to the American economy and consumers today. So as you can see, we have a lot on our plate going forward. Communications law to process improvements and a better functioning FCC. So Randy, thank you for letting me be here today, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. And Ajit's here so he can answer them. So, I'll turn it back over to Randy.
Commissioner Walden, Chairman Walden, you see what happens when you mention Ajit right before that. Chairman Walden, thanks for that terrific opening keynote. That certainly gives us much to think about and talk about as we go forward. I just want to say before turning it over for questions for a few minutes, a couple of things that, in listening to you, that struck me. Putting aside the net neutrality controversy and issue, and that's a difficult thing for me to do sometimes, but putting that aside, I want to just commend you, especially for the COM Act rewrite update process that you started a year ago, in the way that that's unfolded, because I've been advocating for a long time, aside from any particular issue or order, that the Communications Act does need updating, and that that's something that should be done in not decades, but in the near term. And I think the way that that process has unfolded has really been useful in establishing a record. I know that we've tried to contribute to that at the Free State Foundation, but I just think that there's been a good groundwork laid. I want to commend you for that. I know your staff also has spent a lot of time on that, and I think that's terrific. And then the other thing I'll just say quickly, and sort of in line with that, is the work that you've done on FCC process reform. Again, aside from any particular FCC proceeding, having been involved in communications policy now for almost 40 years, and having watched the FCC over those 40 years, particularly in the last several years, I think that's an area where something ought to be done and needs to be done. It should be bipartisan, many of those issues, and thanks again for undertaking that. Now, that said, we're going to take some questions, and I think, would you like me to call people, or
I can do it. Whatever.
I'm good. If you're comfortable doing it,
that's fine.
You can do it.
Yeah, some of these people I know, and I'm not going to call them in. Just kidding. Go ahead. And I think they're going to bring a microphone.
But just if you'll identify yourself, we've got the video tape running, so do that.
Oh, I thought this was all closed press.
First of all, your transparency bill, are you just going to aim that at the idea that you have to look at the rules that they actually propose? Are you going to require some sort of extended notice and comment period on the rules, however that works out? And do you have to amend the APA to do that, or is that in the FCC statute, the 34 to 96?
Well, as you know, that's been one of the arguments. Oh, for heaven's sakes, we couldn't reform the FCC because it's actually governed by the APA, and you can't do just one agency at a time. Well, guess what? That's the only jurisdiction I have, is over the FCC, and we know it's a broken process. I would agree in journalism. That's my background. I come from a state that believes in sunshine and transparency in government. I won't get into what's happened lately there, but emails gone wild. So I actually sincerely believe that consumers are better served when there's more transparency in the policymaking. So however you want to get there, I think you're better if you have an NOI and then an NPRM, and you have a full, open, transparent process where everybody can weigh in, and that they can see the proposed rules so they know what they're commenting on. And before the commissioners have to vote, they ought to have a chance to devour them and understand them. And the public should see them. For heaven's sakes, the chairman of the commission had within his authority the ability to break precedent, but not law, and release the text of his internet order. Right? He can do that. Chose not to. It's not the president of the committee. It hadn't been done, or the commission. But you know what? Sometimes it's okay to break a plate and do something better. When you have 4 million commenters in America concerned about this issue, you're planning to have a complete, Washington-style takeover of the internet. Why wouldn't you make the rules public in advance so everybody knew what they were looking at? So I want a process that's more open and transparent. I'm open to how we get there.
But can you do it with just a rifle shot at the FCC?
Absolutely. I can do it with a shotgun shot at the FCC. And I intend to. And I intend to. After what I've witnessed in the last few years, it needs to happen for the good of the American people. I don't care how we do it. Let's get it done. Wouldn't you all that are out there in the press like to see what these rules are so you can report on fact as opposed to what...
want to give them to me, so
I know you want to bleed to you. So did Google. Got my outer voice again coming down. Yes?
Just 1 second.
Yeah, wait, we'll get you a microphone. It's the old radio guy in me.
I coach kids soccer, so I don't need a microphone. One of the things that concerns me about the requirement of the text is beforehand is whether that means that if there's a variant in that draft, that has to go through another iteration of circulation. Because it seems to me if the FCC is going to be encouraged to deliberate and make changes, you're trying to get more input, there has to be some flexibility to deal with changes that result from the deliberative process.
There are wonderful models in virtually every state in the union with public utility commissions that go through a transparent process where what they're voting on is a matter of public record and available. How they work out that nuance of amendments or whatever, I'm sure we can find a model that will work. Washington is the only place where you regulate in secrecy, and it needs to change.
Well, when Congress deliberates on a bill, there are changes made in the bill
Sure.
throughout the process. And that's the result of the deliberative
Right.
and bipartisan process. It seems to me that it needs to be an essential part of the change.
Absolutely, but I'm not saying it shouldn't be. And of course, they want sunshine provision. You know, they want to wait. It's ironic to me if they want this sunshine law for the commissioners to meet in private, but and then we can call it that. And by the way, they won't get that on my watch till we get process reform. I'll just say that clear and distinctly here, if I have any say in it. But there has to be a better way to do it than the way they're doing it now. And by the way, they are a delegation of authority from the Congress as an independent agency. They're not a room added onto the White House. All right? This is not an extension. And they have to improve their process and the way they operate. And I know Chairman Wheeler said at the outset he was for that. I know others have been for that. There have been improvements. Chairman Janikowski made some improvements in disclosing ex parte contact. Chairman Wheeler said something. At the end of the day, you're going to have a government take over the internet. Not everybody describes it the way I do, but it is what it is. And there should have been more transparency here. I think the policy is better served when there are more eyeballs on what's being proposed. Now, you work out how it gets amended. Oh, for heaven's sake, what if they amended and had their deliberations in open session? That'd be a concept, wouldn't it? And then you could actually see it. The last internet thing they went through that the courts tossed out, I believe, took 10 months and 3.5 years of litigation. 10 months to get the order out, memory serves me right, and 3.5 years of litigation. They're 0 for 3. They're going to be 3 for 3 in the courts. Maybe if they'd had a better process, you wouldn't be in this place. I think we can do it better. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yeah, wait for the mic.
Thank you. Sharon Bowback, Voice of a Moderate. I do a blog at 4,000 to 6,000 pages a day. People are confused about the issue. I kind of need to summarize it in one paragraph, and I've had a difficult time. I've been to the AEI that we spoke before. I've been to some of the Senate hearings and congressional hearings. And to sum it up, if you were to talk to your constituents, what would you say if you had a brief on net
describing what the FCC did, or describing that?
Because people I talked to an FTC commissioner, and you know, there's just so much, and to the average person, it's confusing. And when they think this internet freedom, the government wants to take it over, and then they just kind of leave it out.
Their eyes glaze over?
What?
Their eyes glaze over, and nobody really understands what we're talking about. That describes the regulations. And then there's this headline, you know, from the FTC, Title II, made consumers less safe.
And people get confused between FTC, SEC, so just
there's a host of other acronyms in this town. I would say this, look, there is common ground that we don't want those that have distribute our information on the internet, to have the ability to advantage themselves over a competitor unfairly. That's throttling, blocking, perhaps paid prioritization. We want their networks to be open and transparent so we know what we're getting. Our legislation does that. The commission didn't have to go to 1930 style utility regulation to do that. But now it's gone way beyond that. And there is uncertainty. There's a reason your readers' eyes glaze over on this matter, because we could stop the bad behavior from occurring. There isn't a dramatic record of bad behavior occurring very often over the last decade or two. It's been pretty isolated and dealt with. But we can prevent it. We give the FCC the ability to enforce to prevent it in our draft. But now we don't know what's going to come, do we? Because you have full-throated regulation of Title II. You've got all this forbearance going on. It's never been done, by the way, to have sort of nationwide forbearance on statute. That in and of itself raises issues. The interconnection issue and how it was done raises issues, because if I recall correctly, that was never in the NPRM to say we're going to do interconnection. The chairman said in a press statement, we're not doing interconnection, and now the rules deal with interconnection. Is there any wonder some of us are pretty frustrated about a broken process at the FCC? So, yes?
Hi, Lynn Stanton from TRDLA. So I've only been covering this for about 20 years. I think I should see reauthorization of the FCC. So, do my ignorance. But what exactly does it mean to reauthorize agencies?
You know what's
a deadline is current. It's not going to go away if you don't reauthorize it.
Don't be such an optimist. No, because, so I give you the example of why we should do this and how it operates today. Every year we reauthorize the Department of Defense, the entire Department of Defense. The Congress passes a National Defense Authorization Act every year. If we can do the entire National Defense every year, are you telling me we can't figure out how to reauthorize the Federal Communications Commission? So this gets back to authorizing their spending levels, authorizing how they operate. And that's why I tried to separate it out from any policy issues. I mean, I was in the state legislature. We didn't have the separated authorization appropriation piece, but every year, every 2 years, because we were a 2-year budget, the agencies had to come before our, what we call the Ways and Means Committee. Didn't do tax, we had a separate tax committee, but it'd be equivalent kind of appropriations. And we walked through their budget. And I'm so old, their budget was presented to us on green bar. And so, you know, you flip the big pages, you went through and say, why is so much in this travel account? Why are you spending money over here? You know, I remember when the federal government deregulated trucking and got rid of the ICC. And we discovered the Public Utility Commission had not decreased their staff 1 iota, even though that entire regulatory regime was gone, had no purpose. And so I said, well, what's this about? Oh, well, we changed it because we said they were just padding their budget at that point. And so that's what we need to look at with the FCC. If my numbers are right, the amount of money the FCC has in its budget just for the auction today equals to what their entire budget was in 1995. So, I mean, a lot's happened. And so I think just function, this is about form and function and operation. This is the CFO manager. This is the board saying, why are we doing what we're doing? You know, they want to move out of the portals. They have to. Their lease is up. They want another X, you know, millions of dollars to do that. We need to ask the questions. Why? Where? This is big money. Now they'll say, well, it's not general fund. Like it doesn't come out of your left pocket instead of your right as consumers. So that's what it's about. Yes?
My name is Deborah Lathan, and I had the pleasure of being at the FCC when all the Democrats and Republicans all worked together. I worked for Chairman Kennard at that time. Most times we had very nonpartisan votes, and we saw it very, very hard to make certain that everyone was informed about everything on time, and there was it was a deliberative, analytical agency. And I say that because I just want us to be very careful here that we don't overreact to the moment. Right now we are in a very politically partisan environment, so of course that flows down to the FCC. And I concur with you that there needs to be some changes in transparency. But at one time, it worked, is what I'm saying.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is, in your rewrite, I think it's very careful to not succumb to the emotions of the moment and and what has happened because of one order, and to preserve the essence of what the FCC was, to make it better for the future.
Couldn't agree more, and I started this process long before we got to the net neutrality issue. This is not about this moment, and I tried to make that clear. We were passing process reform. I'll tell you what, I'll give you my own personal example. We were in the radio business for 2 decades. We filed for some applications for 250 watt translators for our FM, for a mountainous country. And 10 years after we filed, the FCC granted those applications and gave us 30 days notice to perfect them all. Broken process, maybe? You can do mega mergers with huge companies and you can't process these little applications. There are pending, there are some really nasty things being put on the airwaves by pirates that are really vulgar, shutting down minority signals in low power, I believe, that have been pending for almost a year. You tell me you can't free an engineer to go triangulate and shut them down? These are the management issues I struggle with. There's an AM order to try and save AM broadcast so you have diversity in the marketplace. The chairman says, I don't have money to get to it. Really? Is that really the case? Is that your final? Do you need to make a call? Is that your final answer? And so I'm not after one chairman or anything. I'm after a better process, more transparency and reform. That's why we put out drafts. It's why we've had our draft bill out. It's why we did as Randy's. I'm getting the hook. As Randy said, what did I say now? As Randy said, it's our COMACT update. It's all about putting the questions out, getting the information in, so that we can have more informed decision making. That's all I'm asking for. And I think you're right that the FCC used to be an analytical, fact-based, as you described it, agency. I'm afraid it's gotten way away from that. And this recent sort of spat and emails and everybody searching out who said what to whom would seem to indicate the FCC is, or the White House is playing, or staff in the White House certainly played a role in this issue. I've never seen a president like issue a video saying, here's what I expect you to do, in essence. I mean, if you can't read those signals, you're an appointee, come on. And so, I don't know. I think we'll be better served by a more open, transparent process where the public regains confidence. We've tried to do that in Congress. We're not always perfect at that. I know that shocks you. But we've tried. We've tried to fix our own processes. That's why we're doing legislative hearings and subcommittee and making texts available. And I just think we're better served. That's why I've created these bipartisan, equally divided task forces that help get us and get the agencies together that freed up the spectrum that then has been auctioned from the government. I think we all need to learn more and we'll benefit more when it's more transparent. So anyway, thank you for your service, by the way, at the FCC. I know there are really good people working there. I just want to be able to work in a better environment and with more public confidence. So thank you very much, everyone, for letting me be here today. Remember, hearing starts 11 o'clock. So.